but it's Super Bowl Sunday. I realized that I don't know these things because not only am I not in the States anymore, but when I was, I didn't pay attention to sporting events. So it didn't even occur to me that I was scheduling a book club on the same Sunday as the Super Bowl.
That's okay. It's on downstairs, and I'm only interested in the commercials anyway, and I haven't seen any commercials yet that have been just so inspiring, but and I can always watch them later because they're all filmed, and tomorrow there will be a top 10 list of the commercials. So
yeah, and that's what I'm planning on waiting for, is once that happens, then I'll go ahead and tune into that. All right. Well, let's get started by talking about, we're looking at section 2, your message.
Mm-hmm.
And with this section, it's mostly about what we say, how we communicate to other people and how we develop our intellectual property. And one of the things they talk about with full spectrum ideas is that they are relevant, thorough, elegant, and unique. And so I guess the question I want to start with today is, how do you tell the difference between these layers?
So doesn't that not depend on the audience too, on their perception of what all of this means? I mean, if it's relevant, it's got to be relevant to the audience that you are directing it towards.
Yeah.
Dan Miller always says, confused buyer never buys. So it's got to be simple, something that they can relate to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, that having it relevant to the audience and thorough for the audience, elegant for the audience, and unique to the audience. Yeah, that could be a good way to position it. Hey, Matt, thank you for joining us. You can pop in whenever you're ready.
Hey, Caelan. Hi, everyone. Is it just the three of us, or are there more?
So far, it's Super Bowl Sunday right now. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're doing a book against the Super Bowl, it's.
You're a brave man, Caelan. You're a brave man.
Yeah, so what we were just talking about, Matt, is the full spectrum ideas that they described, that they should be relevant and thorough and elegant and unique. And we're trying to figure out what the difference is between these layers. And I like how you bring up audience, Sonia, because relevant to the audience, like that's where the relevance is. But I don't know if you need the audience for the other three. For it to be thorough and elegant and unique, those kinds of ideas can kind of exist in a microcosm, independent of their of the audience, don't you think?
I would agree. I would also add to that there needs to be an element of simplicity, and so maybe elegance is aligned with simplicity, because again, a confused buyer doesn't buy, so it's got to be something that is easily understandable. I mean, that could be thorough. It's got to be simple enough, but yet have enough depth. And it's got to be different. I mean, if you think about sticky messages, you're talking about the commercials. If you think about something as simple as, gosh, what was one? I mean, if you think about the brand taglines like Nike's "Just Do It." I mean, it's relevant. It's thorough. I mean, how much more can you say? Just do it. Elegant? Nah, I'm not sure. How it depends on how you define elegant. But unique, nobody else was saying that when they came out with that. So it's
except
sticky.
For Nancy Reagan. There's a theory that's gone around that the "Just Do It" tagline came about when it was "Just Say No" was the tagline.
Say no, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Correct. Right. So say no is different than just do it. For me, just do it has more positive attributes than just say no. So
right.
Just do it, to me, it's maybe I'm more in that target audience there, but it's more relevant because I'm
Yeah.
always looking for something that's positive in a nudging way.
Hmm. And it's so relevant too, because when you're putting on your Nike gear, that's when you're battling with yourself. Should I do this, or am I going to be too lazy today? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's relevant to the time when the customer is using the product.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's relevant too if you are the type of person who is looking to take some sort of action.
Mm-hmm.
If your intentions are to get movement into your life, no matter what that movement is an actionable phrase that is sticky. It doesn't matter what the activity is, just do it. I think goes across a broad spectrum, and it really aligns with purpose and intention.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we pulled it back from the broadness of how it's applicable to achieving goals and doing what you set out to do, if it wasn't so thorough, if it was go run and that was the tagline, it wouldn't be thorough anymore. Because what if you didn't want to go run? What if you were getting ready to go for a swim? What if you were getting ready to climb? And so that thoroughness it works for just do it because it's applicable in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Like how you were saying, it has to be simple. If it's simple, then it's elegant. Maybe if it's thorough, then it's comprehensive. Maybe if it's relevant, then it matches the audience. So what makes it unique?
That nobody's done it before?
That nobody's done it before? Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's so simple. It's like, duh, why didn't I think of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And those
I
are
think it's
often.
also, I think it's also, I don't know if you've read Seth Godin's Purple Cow.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also about making it remarkable, right?
Yeah.
So uniqueness isn't enough. It's got to be something that it's so unique that people want to virally share and talk about. Because something can be unique without being interesting, and something that I want to share. So I think that's an important thing as well. And just coming back to that point on on relevance. Again, I was listening to Spin Selling by Neil Rackham today. I don't know if you read that book or listened to the podcast, but
Yeah.
he talks about how you need to align the values of the buyer with the aspirations of your product. So it's important, I guess, to contextualize back to how, and the example that they gave was, someone buying crisps or potato crisps in the shopping aisle. You can buy, the tastiest ones, or you can buy the most sustainable ones, or you can buy, those that are low in fat, for example. And a different buyer segment will engage with the same kind of product, potato crisps, in a different way based on, their aspiration is sustenance, but their values determine their purchase decision, kind of thing. So that relevance, I think, comes back to, how do you identify with the values of the tribe, if you like, that you're trying to address, your market, and then how do you make your aspiration, your offer, your message relevant to their values. So it's not just about saying, well, you can increase team performance. It's like, well, what kind of values are you mapping that to for that organization or those people? And then a great tip that I picked up on the thoroughness side was a mentor of mine who once said, say it straight and then say it great. So the first thing to do with a message is just kind of capture the essence of it, and don't worry too much about whether it's elegant. And that sort of plays into the elegance thing as well, because you sometimes have to iterate on that message multiple times to get it to say it great and make it punchy. So I'm sure that they didn't sit down, when they did the branding for Nike and just come up straight away with just do it. They might have done what you suggested, Caelan, which is, go run, or other variations on that theme. And so, they had to iterate a number of times to come up with that really punchy, relevant, broadly applicable, connecting with the values of the tribe, because people who are, associate themselves with the brand Nike tend to be doers. You know, that's how they would describe themselves. They go out and they do the triathlons. They go and do the, you know, the Ironman events. They go and play sport. So they really needed something that was kind of broadly applicable to their tribe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Matt, what was that saying again? Say it.
Say it straight, then say it great.
I love that. Yeah, because often when you're getting to a tagline or you're getting to, you know, a really poetic statement in a pink sheet, it takes you time to get there. You know, you've got to really work at it, and getting it out first as the author is essential. So that way you know what you're working with, but then taking the time to really have it communicated elegantly. That is, I think that's where the you know, the craft of being a thought leader really comes in, is that it's up to us to make it elegant enough that people will hear it and say, wow, let's say it straight and then say it great.
Yeah.
There's this poetic elegance to it. Yeah. And I was in a webinar once with Cole Fink for the foundation program at Thought Leaders Business School. And he gave us this really great, it was a webinar on your weak pink sheets. And the pink sheet is like, it's a kind of a slang term used in the Thought Leaders curriculum, Sonia, for this IP snapshot that we were reading about in section 2. And he said, okay, everybody bring in a pink sheet that isn't that great. Your statement is weak. And we're going to work on creating commercial poetry. That's what he called it. Commercial poetry, kind of elegant, kind of unique. And he gave us these exercises to do with the weak statement, that we work with rhythm, rhyme, repetition, and alliteration. And he said, if you can work any of those 4 things in, you're going to get a more poetic cadence to your central statement. And then he said, try and explain this in 9 words, and then in 5 words, and then in 3 words, and then in 1 word. And just that exercise of like, how can I distill this message down? It helped us find what was really important. But the best thing was when he said, okay, now you're going to explain this statement to somebody who's 7, to somebody who's 17, to somebody who's 37, and to somebody who's 70. And by rewriting the statement to those different audiences, it highlighted what's really important here. What's the stuff that really sticks? And so I found those exercises very useful.
Yeah, I could see how that could, because you can go more in depth. Yet, I think it's still important to be concise and succinct, because that provides clarity. For
sure. Yeah, and when you're developing all this material, you're doing it to find those nuggets that you actually use and show to the world. If I have 4 different ways of describing a statement, I don't share all of that with anybody. You know, that's like the private internal work. I like to say in copywriting that you develop this whole big long article so that you can find the headline. Because the headline will show up somewhere in there where you're like, oh, that's a really great turn of phrase, or that's the point I'm trying to get to. But it takes you 8 or 10 paragraphs to get there. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's an element too of, you know, like what you're talking about is actively working on things, right? And those are some great patterns for, you know, when you're really deep in it. But one of the things that came out of, I watched on the weekend, Lynn Kazali's Pink Sheet Hackathon session from the curriculum. And in that, you know, she made the point, I thought it was a very good one, is, you know, it's okay to start and not finish a pink sheet too. So let the subconscious kind of go to work on these things. So you start with, you know, you might start with your phrase, and you might start with you know, a metaphor, for example, but then you haven't, you know, no matter how much you try and force the thinking, you kind of get stuck. But then you walk away from the sheet, and then all of a sudden this funny process happens in the back of your mind where you get an insight through an interaction you have with someone, or through something you read, or through, you know, just the fact that you're, you know, switching your brain off and getting into flow by, you know, having a shower, that can, you know, that can really help you bring out these things from your subconscious as well. So it's an important thing, I think, to not over labor the pink sheets, because oftentimes our subconscious does the work for us.
Yeah.
Absolutely, especially in the shower, and that's why I've been arguing with my husband that we need a whiteboard in the shower.
I completely agree.
um, so, Caelan, what were I got the three rhythm, rhyme, alliteration, but there was a fourth one that because I've never been through that exercise, and I'm at a point where I'm really wanting to actually, since I've read this book, I haven't actually gone through the exercises that he suggests with the 52 cards, and I'm like, I need to do this.
Yeah, when getting the 52 pink sheets together, it clarifies your IP in a way like nothing else does. So the four aspects that he recommends pulling in are rhythm, rhyme, repetition, and alliteration.
Okay, repetition was one I was missing.
Mm-hmm. And the other notes.
The irony of that is not lost on me.
Yeah, right. The other notes that I had from that is that rephrase your message to the left brain and the right brain, and then also rephrase it in casual language and formal language. Yeah, if you're serious about doing the pink sheets, the foundation program has a bunch of videos that walk you through how to do it and how to organize them. I watched this great video this morning where Cole was talking about how to organize them into 4 different suits, like a deck of cards, and what the heart is for. You know, it's the why, and what the diamond is for. It gives you clarity, and like his metaphors were just fantastic.
Yeah, that was so. I watched that same session late last week, Caelan, and you may have seen it on Central, but I shared a link to a template that I've put together, based on that, to help people sort of flesh out 100 pink sheets based across up to 5 domains.
Yeah, I've got a copy of that. In
just
my
mainly about that. Yeah, mainly about the A statement. But I went back and actually reviewed my original version of that and added in the suits and the cards and some of the key points that he made. So if you took a copy, maybe go back.
Great, I'll go get the fresh copy. Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and Sonia, if you really want to take on pink sheets this month, I've got a link that can get you a trial membership into the foundation for $1. And so I'll share that with you after we're done with the meeting.
Okay.
It is by far and away the best $1,500 you'll ever spend.
Totally true. And I say this as somebody who used to design and develop learning management systems for a living. Their online delivery of their courseware, it's the best I've ever seen. It's far and away, hands down. It's not the UI, the user interface, I think, is a little clunky, but the delivery of the material and the progress that people make through it, it's like nothing I've ever seen.
I also think the strength of it is the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
so it's about having, these kind of conversations online, being able to connect with others in this space who are struggling with the same things. I think that's hugely valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's not subscription just astonishes me.
Yeah.
You do have to pay a fair bit up front, but if you think about it, a one-day course would probably cost you the equivalent, and you get indefinite access to this community and this IP. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, the community generally, if you look at it, Seth Godin's, that's his workshops. I've been through his marketing seminar. I mean, it's all about the community. And that goes back to Lev Vygotsky's work around we learn through each other, or with interaction with each other versus independently.
Yeah.
So very much as an educator, I understand that. I get that. And it's true. It's truth.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's move on to chapter 5. In chapter 5, we talk about the IP snapshot and the different sections of this worksheet, for lack of a better term. That there's the context up at the top, there's the concept in the middle, and the content at the bottom. And the content is your case studies and your stories. It's the real world application of your idea. And the context is like the abstract version of your idea. And you've got models for the left brain and metaphors for the right brain. And there's a similar division on the bottom where the case studies appeal to the left brain because there's statistics and facts and figures, and the stories appeal to the right brain. So my question is, can you test an IP Snapshot's left-right balance? Can you tell when one side is weaker than the other? And if so, how?
Well, as a speaker, if you inundate your audience with facts, their eyes are going to glaze over by the time you get to the third one. If you don't intersperse a story, because the stories connect us emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we know that from research, our people's attention spans are about 10 minutes. And so, and I'm looking at it from a speaker's perspective. And that's how I know that, okay, yes, this is where my content needs to be. If I see eyes glazing over, like, oh, you know what? I've messed up. I've got too much left brain. I need to intersperse more right brain stories there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Sonia, do you think it's more in the delivery than the pink sheet or the IP snapshot?
You know, I when I look at speaking, I look at three different, you know, like Matt Church has the message, the method, and the other. I look at speaking as content, delivery, and connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So content is what the gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Delivery is how you deliver, because voice modulation can engage or not. And then connection is, there's a lot of neuroscience actually on, for instance, proximity to your audience. There is raising oxytocin, all of that. The word you is a connector. Stories are a connector.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all that neuroscience that you can intersperse. So I look at speaking as a sort of three-ringed model.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I teach it. That's how I coach around that. So Matt, I'm not sure that answers your question, but that's kind of how I.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's how the three interplay, right? It's being cognizant of not just, as you say, your voice modulation or your pace, but also being cognizant of, are you making the right connections for your audience that bring them back to the content. Which reminds me a lot of, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Sharon Bowman. She wrote a book called Teaching from the Back of the Room.
Yes.
That's got a lot of stuff in it about making connections. And also what I like about, I don't know if you've come across her 6 trumps, you know, so talking trumps listening, standing trumps sitting, pitches trump words, those kind of things. Really, really useful tools in that space of, you know, speakership.
Yes, and she came to one of our National Speakers Association meetings years ago.
Oh, great.
And I've been a big fan of hers ever since, because what she did in that 3-hour time span was just remarkable.
It's phenomenal, isn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So I want to dig a little deeper on your question, Matt, on whether the delivery is how you test the balance. Because I could see if you take an IP snapshot up on stage and, you know, the eyes start glazing over, as you said, Sonia, then you know that you're going too deep in statistics. And instead you've got to, you know, spend more time in stories to keep them engaged. And so from a delivery standpoint, that's a great way to test. How does this lean too far to the left or too far to the right? But I wonder, is there a way that you can just look at a pink sheet while you're at home in your own laboratory and you're sifting through? Can you highlight, wait, this one is weak on the left side, or that one is very strong on the right side, but I need more left brain here? Is there a way you can do that just with the IP snapshot itself?
Outside of intuition, you know, and just, you know, sort of reflection, I guess. I'm not sure that there is a way to test it. You know, I think for me at least, I always think about context as, you know, I guess, the backbone of does my content, to utilize Sonia's thing, resonate? Because the way I present something to a bunch of accountants might be quite different to how I present it to a bunch of HR, professionals. And again, different to if I was speaking to a group of artists. So for me, I feel like you have to contextualize it and visualize, what problem is this pink sheet solving? Linking it back to the green sheet. This is something I've been reflecting on over the weekend as well. Is, whilst I see the power of putting things into pink sheets, I feel like they only come to life once you link them to a green sheet, because you've got that. How might I solve someone's problem with this knowledge, with this thought leadership? How am I actually helping someone? Because it's great to have all these thoughts in your head and have a stack of 52 pink sheets, which helps you feel confident and stand in the conviction of what you know, and that's absolutely a powerful thing. But it's really only the cluster strategy that helps you prove that out. Right? I've got to go out there and deliver it. I've got to go and talk to people. I've got to think, sell, and deliver before I really know the value of something.
So it really goes back into a speaker's world where the question always becomes, what's in it for me? That's what your audience is always thinking. They will never say it. We'll never hear it. So I think that goes to the context. And to Matt, your point is, does my, as you said, accountants, yes, you need to approach them. What's in it for them is going to be different than the HR people. So what's in it for them is different. So I think, yes, you have the same message, but you tailor it to meet the what's in it for me for each audience that you might be encountering.
Yeah,
or might be
and I think you're right. I think the click that's just happened for me through this questioning, so thank you, Caelan, is really the test is to put it alongside a green sheet. So you take your pink sheet, you put it alongside a green sheet, and then you can reflect back into the pink sheet. Hey, have I got enough around this to talk about the known spoken, known unspoken, and the unknown problems? Is my value statement clear? Could I support my value statement with, the 5 elements of a pink sheet in this context? And then you can take that one step further and say, well, my positioning matrix also needs to be aligned. So it's almost like the more context you put around it by just the standalone pink sheet, if you then add the green sheet, you get a bit deeper with the pink sheet. And then again, with the positioning matrix, you get a bit deeper again. So it maybe is just the tooling. That's how you can use the tooling to reflect back on whether the pink sheet is strong or not.
Yeah, and I like the examples that you brought up of an accounting firm versus HR professionals. Because if you're talking to an accounting firm, then they're going to be much more interested in the content that's based around statistics. What's in it for me? They want to see return on investment. They want to see time spent and time saved. Whereas HR professionals, they may be much more emotionally invested in your content, and they might want to see the stories that you're talking about for transformation. The outcome of this is the story of someone who went through this. And so maybe the context is so essential to the left-right balance that you can't even test that balance unless you know the context. And you find it out, like you said, Matt, if you're doing a green sheet and you're pitching somebody with it, it's basically a point of delivery. It's just like you're speaking on stage, but you're speaking to one person. And whether or not that person is engaged and whether or not that person's eyes are glazed over, to balance it for that person, it may require more stories and less case studies than if you were pitching somebody else who's from a different profession or has a different left-right balance.
Yeah, precisely. Yep. And it's also important to recognize that, there's kind of 3 broad categories. You've got your very left brain, your very right brain, and what I'd call your middle brain people who need a bit of both, right? So they need some evidence, but they need some emotion as well. And to me, that's kind of the 3 examples was, the accountants you would traditionally associate being left brain, facts and figures. Your artists would be very right brained, very, how do I feel about this? And what, sort of what's the emotion attached to it? And then your middle brains, your HR professionals, because they have to deal with both the people aspects, but the practicalities as well of, talent management.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. Yeah, and to follow up on that, I've always found that case study as the definition of the left brain content, it's never really sat well with me. I've always thought of it more as like a middle brain kind of. So I really like your phrasing here that there's left brain, right brain, and middle brain. And for me, a case study is, it's a story of a client that had this result, which does have some demonstrable statistics. But then I see statistics as the actual left brain fodder. If somebody wants left brain material, giving them statistics that's my favorite way to do it. But for me, a case study, it's got a story baked into it because would you agree?
You know what, I would, and as I teach public speaking, there's the narrative, example, statistic, and testimony. So we leave testimony out for the moment. So narrative is all about the story. Example is that middle ground. Examples are not stories. Examples are, a case study would be an example. So that hits that middle ground. And statistics would certainly be your more analytical evidence of what you're trying to present.
Mm-hmm. Wow, it's really interesting. That was a big insight for me. Sorry, I'm just taking some notes here.
Yeah, so I call it my own diversion or I guess system of this I call it nest. As my students are developing their speeches, this is how you expand on that particular, a particular point they're trying to make with their audience.
Mm-hmm. Is NEST an acronym?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What does it stand for?
So it stands for narrative, example, statistics, and testimony. And testimony are quotes from people who are experts, because unless you've done the original research, oftentimes testimony can provide credibility and validation for, the message that you're trying to, or the point that you're trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
Is that one of your pink sheets, Sonia?
It can be.
It should be. It definitely should be. That's powerful stuff.
Yeah, that's good.
I love it. I've taken a note of that. I'm not going to pinch it, but I'm definitely going to use it.
Okay. Yeah. And that was something that, I developed over the years, teaching public speaking for, over a decade, that helps my students expand on a particular point they're just trying to make. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know how to trademark that or that is part of my IP.
Because you've got at least 5 pink sheets there, right? You've got the high level description of how the parts fit together, and then each of the parts is in itself at least 1 pink sheet, right? Where you talk about what makes for a good narrative, what makes for a good example, what makes for a good statistic, and what makes for a good testimony, and you can make points about all of those things. So there's 5 pink sheets minimum that you just got from that one idea.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I need to have 52 of these.
Well, you'll probably find that as you drill down into each of those dimensions, and that's why I say it's a minimum, that you'll want to make 3 other points about each of them, right? So you'll then end up with 15 pink sheets, all interrelated to that one master model at the top around NEST.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm excited to dive into that.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, it's a great formula. I like NEST as a progression for, because if somebody's getting up on stage and speaking and thinking, what do I do next? It's such a simple formula for them to progress from one to the next. Mm-hmm. So this NEST acronym, would this be in the model section of the IP Snapshot? Left brain context? Or would it be a metaphor for the right brain?
I see it, I'm looking at the model menu, and I see it in relationships, because, not every point might have a story, but you might have an example. Not every point would have an example, but you might have a very awesome narrative
Mm-hmm.
to communicate a particular point. So I see it as a yeah, I'm not sure how to never really thought about using it as a model. I've always just written the acronym and just kind of
I think
expanded.
it's worth, where my mind went, Sonia, was, and to answer Caelan's question a bit more directly, I think it is the model, but I also think you could find a metaphor in there. So on the left-hand side at the top, you've got your model, and you may even want to think about whether you could create a quadrant matrix around it. So, for example, are things more emotional versus more logical versus things are more, I don't know, create, more of a tell versus an ask, for example. Just, play with some continuums around that to see whether you can kind of create this picture of a narrative is more, kind of us or tells a story and is more emotional, whereas a testimonial might be it's emotional, but it's also a fact, if you know what I mean. So just drawing up different boxes around that might help. And then in terms of your metaphor, is there, and this is something that came out of the Pink Sheet Hackathon session with Lynn that I watched on Sunday, is our brains are amazing at drawing connections between unrelated ideas. So if you just said, how does a bird's nest relate to the acronym NEST in terms of speakership? And how might I create a picture of, is like, right? So a nest is like, it creates safety. So, maybe it's a way for speakers to get confidence. It's an incubator, so it's a way to incubate ideas, So you could start to play with that as a metaphor, and then really tie the two together. I think it's got a lot of possibility in there.
Oh, thank you for that. I love that. That is awesome.
I can't take credit. That's Lynn's work, but it resonated for me.
Oh yeah, I've never thought of it in that way. And two, for a speaker, I relate this to psychological safety for the audience. The audience wants to feel safe.
Yeah, that's great.
And as a
Perfect.
speaker, one of your responsibilities is to ensure that your audience feels safe.
Oh yeah, and you're making a nest just for the season. Because birds don't make nests for good. They don't make houses that they come back to year after year. It's, we're going to make this nest for this period of time, and I'm going to nurture you through this experience. And then when we're done, you're going to fly away and this nest is going to be gone. But while you're here, I'll protect you.
Yeah, that you could take that so many directions with, taking the baby birds out of the nest and enabling them to fly on their own. I mean, there's so many things that you could do there. And one of the exercises that Lynn did that really resonated for me was, she said, look, write down 5 hobbies and 3 points that you know about each of those hobbies and put that to one side, and then start working on your pink sheets. And then you come back to this random thing, which is, how is what I'm talking about here like cycling, or how is what I'm talking about here like, winemaking, or how is it like, whatever your hobbies are. And it's amazing how quickly your brain will jump to concepts and really bring those metaphors to life, because a lot of people struggle with metaphor. But a great place to start, and this is also part of Matt's book, Think, is, he talks about dipping into your hobbies as a way to build those metaphors.
Wow, this is so rich.
Yep, I love this material because there's always so much to dig in. And I really like how you brought up, Matt, that the nest metaphor, or the nest idea itself, it can be one IP snapshot. And then each member of that acronym can be its own IP snapshot. And I wonder, is there a way that you can tell the difference between one idea and something that should be a group of ideas?
It's a deep question.
Yeah, well, moving on to, chapter 6, Capture Your Genius. It gives us the framework for how do we collect all of our ideas and organize them. And something that I've found problematic is, having an idea and not knowing if there's more pink sheets in there, if I should stop here and leave it, or if I know that there's a different statistic I can use, and I know there's a different story, but do I just switch those out based on the group I'm talking to, based on the context that I want to deliver? Or does this really deserve its own independent IP snapshot? I haven't figured out a good answer to that. Do you have any ideas?
I think it's an awesome question. And what I know for speakers is that you have a spine, you have the bones of your talk. And yes, you do add stories or take away stories based on your audience. So it's one story is going to resonate with this particular audience, but you know what? It's probably not appropriate for another audience. So it's like an interchangeable parts. The foundation, that the bones are there. However, you are changing, the arm length or the the size of the nose or whatever. I'm using a human person as as my metaphor here. But I think that's an interesting idea of what's the difference between one idea or a group. I think as I'm looking at this, and I haven't delved really deeply into the pink sheets as much as you all have. I haven't even seen the course, but my thoughts were that the ideas would be somewhat all interrelated, that there's some synergy among ideas.
Well, I think there's a relation in terms of categorization. Like they talk about creating folders, and your folders can be thematically related or not. Like I've got a folder on marketing, and I've got a folder on sales, and those are kind of related. But then I also have this folder on mindset, which you can make the argument is related to those, but functionally those pink sheets are very different than the ones in sales and in marketing. And so I think for the existing pink sheets, scaling up, like, yeah, there's categories, there's folders we could look at. But when I'm looking at an individual IP snapshot, I don't know if I'm done. I don't know if this is like the master IP and there's more to drill down on, or if this encapsulates the whole idea. Does that make sense?
So, and that brings another question as I was thinking about today in preparation for this. Yes, I read the book 2 years ago, and what I initially, had as I had looked upon some notes, but my ideas have certainly evolved over the past 2 years, and you can see, wow, what I'm thinking now is really different than how I thought 2 years ago. So I don't think this is a static process. I think it's
right.
You continually evolve as you learn more.
I agree, and I think the other thing that happens is sometimes you'll see your IP in a different context, and it will lead to a different path of where that is. And Matt talks about in one of his videos, captured from one of the sessions, the idea that your IP, so your IP snapshots or your pink sheet, can live in multiple folders, and can have a very different spin on it depending on where it lives. So your core idea in your model and your metaphor might be the same across folders, or maybe you'll have a different metaphor, one for sales and one for marketing, because of your audience. Those kind of things. There's also, Sonia, if you're interested in digging more into this and not necessarily yet ready to jump onto the foundation program, which again, if Caelan can get you the $1 special, it's absolutely brilliant. But there's actually a website, pinksheetprocess.com, which it basically is a bunch of videos on pink sheets, and a lead into the book and so on. So that may be useful for you. I certainly tapped into that before I joined the foundation program and found it very useful. So I think it's about an hour's worth of videos all told. They're broken into different modules, but it may well be helpful in terms of understanding a bit more about that process.
Oh, thank you for that. I just wrote that down. I will be looking into that for sure.
Oh yeah, this is all the good stuff. Yeah, this is great. I didn't know about this website. This is awesome. Cool. So Matt, you've been doing pink sheets for I think longer than any of us. Um, to circle back to what Sonia was saying about how they evolve over time, have you noticed your own pink sheets changing over time as your thinking has matured or as your understanding of your market has matured?
Well, actually, I'm at quite an early stage, so I'm the kind of guy who dives deep to really understand, the knowledge and the tooling at the
Hmm.
beginning of the process. Some people like to start doing, without the knowledge. I like to really, immerse myself in the knowledge and understanding first. But what I have found is, yeah, just getting a bit of rhythm going can help. And then, I guess fundamentally, my background is, agility and delivery. So for me, I kind of approach the world with a sense that perfect is the enemy of progress. So just trying to not get too caught up in, oh, this pink sheet's not quite perfect yet. And that message really came through from Lynn's talk on the weekend as well, which was really around, leave some white space for your subconscious. She suggested, I don't know if you've heard of the Pomodoro technique,
Hmm.
but it's basically time boxing to 20 minutes and then giving yourself a break. And she suggested using that. And then she said, well, build two pink sheets, just use a continuum and come up with, the extremes of that continuum. So, something good and something bad. So an example might have been, something's organized or chaotic. And then build two pink sheets, one on organized and one on chaotic. And then just, sort of flesh that out in your 20-minute time box. There's not enough time probably to finish that sheet or those sheets when you're first starting. And that's actually a good thing. And we need to get comfortable with that, is just jotting down things, crafting out these pink sheets. Because even if we were to spend, there's a diminishing return, even if we were to spend the whole 20 minutes on a single sheet, then we'll probably find that after a good night's sleep and maybe a couple of gins, we might have a different way of approaching the same sheet.
Yeah.
So, I think it's getting comfortable with the fact that it does evolve. And to your point, Sonia, the quote that came to mind when you mentioned about how you look back a couple of years on some of the stuff and you see how it's evolved was this idea that the more we know, the more we realize we don't know. And so, every time we learn something, it opens up a whole new pathway of learning. And so that's something that we just need to get comfortable with is, we'll get some feedback from the people we talk to. We'll incorporate that back in, and that's the art of what we do.
Hmm.
And just if we sort of sit in our little, and I'm looking at your loft there, Caelan, if I just sat in the loft and just sort of gathered my IP without any feedback, I'm going to get a very different experience to if I put that out in the world and allow it to sort of develop a life of its own. And Matt talks about how our messages don't come from us, they come through us, which is, a philosophical and partially spiritual thing. But I think it's an interesting observation.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Well, too, and I think of the topics I spoke on, say maybe 2 years ago. They've evolved because audiences, if they want me back, I've got to have something different, or maybe perhaps more depth in from what I've presented, in the past. So it helps to also be thinking of something related but fresh, because I try to stay in my lane, because that's how you develop your expertise, is you stay in a particular lane, but just going further and deeper and with a fresher perspective keeps the inquiries coming in.
Hmm.
Definitely. And the other thing that Matt talked about that's relevant here, I think, is, you might have heard the word Zeitgeist, the German word Zeitgeist, which means the thought of the day or the thoughts of the day. And he talked about, part of building your pink sheet on particularly the case study side, and to an extent on the story side as well, is the three types of literature review. So you've got your classic literature in this topic, you've got your contemporary, and you've got your current. And if you're across all three of those, you can start to pull it apart. And the great thing is, if you're in the current, you can talk about a very current book in this space. And that brings, he didn't say these words, but my insight was, it brings natural authority because you're up to date on your topic. And so you can relate, you can accredit that work. You certainly don't, pass it off as your own, but you can say, in her book, Teaching from the Back of the Room, Sharon Bowman talks about the six trumps. And then you can go into some detail on that, and it sort of brings some IP and you present it in your way, but you're still giving credit to, and it's current in its application.
Hmm. Yeah, you're borrowing authority. I really like
Absolutely.
how they talk about, you should be reviewing the books in your field and then having opinions on them. Because that's the best way to demonstrate that you're an expert on the topic, is to help other people understand what others are saying in the field. And it's a very natural way to extend your intellectual property, is just to say, hey, this is a book that's based on these things, and then this is what I think about it and what I got from it, and this is what the author's trying to say. Digesting that for your audience, it's a very natural way to share IP.
Yeah, and it also offers them a service, right? Because not everyone's got the time to read a book, and that's told out by services like Blinkist and 12 Minutes and these
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things. Get abstract. Whereas if you're delivering that in whether it's through coaching, mentoring, speakership, or even referring to it in your authorship, it's a way to sort of, as you say, borrow authority, and also provide people with a bit of a way to expand. There's this thought about leaving the white space for people, so not always giving them all the answers, but
Mm.
leading them down a path and leaving some white space to engage them mentally so that they can connect with it. Coming back to Sonia's earlier point about connection, so they can connect back to the content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see a lot of encouragement around the white space idea. I haven't seen it referred to this way. I like your phrasing very much. But I've seen a similar idea promoted quite often, in that we should be sharing the why and not the how. That the how is what you pay for. And so the things that we deliver, when people have bought from us, that's when we give the how. But the why, that's the forward-facing content that we share in order to draw people into us.
Yeah, I've heard that before, but I've also heard it, the what and the why are
Yes.
what you talk to, and
Why
the
do we
how is what you charge for. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I agree.
And
I've heard
just to, sorry, go. Yep.
no, I just said yes. That's what I've also understood is the what and the why, and the how is the paid programs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the other interesting insight that I've picked up over the years is there's three kinds of how. There's done by you, done with you, and done for you.
Mm-hmm.
So done by you is an instruction manual, you do it yourself. Done with you is sort of maybe a coaching program or something of that ilk. And then the done for you is an outsourced service where, you ask the questions and I'll provide the answers, kind of thing. So you've got different ways to monetize the how.
That is so helpful for me, because I've been working with that same 3-item structure, but I've been stuck with DIY, do it yourself. And it's a very difficult way to transition phrasing from, here, this is the do it yourself, to this is the done for you, to the done with you. But the by, that B in there, that solves the problem. So that's awesome. Thank you, Matt.
Okay, no problem.
So we can divide how into a few different ways. Do we ever need to divide the why or the what?
I think the what defines what it is that you are, your expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And the why is the why I do it. What was the what instigated? What's the instigator? What's the reasoning? What's the
Mm-hmm.
impetus for doing this work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it will depend on where people are relative to the knowledge. So your why will depend on your context. And sometimes in obviously your audience is not homogenous. Your audience will have different levels of experience, different levels of responsibility in their lives. And this is something I've been working on for my own, edification, I guess, is really, thinking about what types of organizations do I want to work with in terms of what industry are they in, what
Mm-hmm.
size are they, in terms of are they a small startup versus all the way up to a multinational. The people that I'm engaging with, what level of seniority are they at? Are they a team member or are they, a senior executive or director? And then what level of experience do they have in this particular topic? Are they, a beginner, intermediate, or advanced? And if you start mapping that out, you can say, well, now I've got my kind of group. I know what industry they're in. I know what level of seniority and authority they have. I know, what their level of engagement with this content is. It gives me a great way to sort of then start unpacking the problems that those people will be struggling with, those, known spoken and known unspoken problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the problem set is just a whole, we're going to dive into that next week when we talk about section 3, your market. And there's so much good stuff there. So the 3 chapters for next week are going to be, let me just review these real quick. It's going to be your market. Chapter 7 is clicking with value. Chapter 8, selling thought leadership. That's where we're going to dive into the green sheet. And chapter 9, the power of positioning. And that's going to be really fun. I'm really looking forward to next week. But this week, I've had some really big insights, and I want to thank both of you for this conversation. This has been super fun.
This is our Super Bowl.
Yeah, this has been
our Super Bowl.
That's right.
The Thought Leaders Super Bowl. I love that. Great. Okay, so until I see you next week, say it straight and then say it great.
Fantastic. Thanks, Caelan. Thanks,
Awesome.
Sonia.
Everybody.
Have a great week.
Out there.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.